In The Edge of Evolution, I consider the question of, well, how far into life does design extend? And the opposite way of looking at it is, how much can random changes plus selection really explain in life? Certainly can explain some things. And I argue that from molecular biochemical considerations, I argued that design had to extend down to the level of biological class. And class is something like fish versus birds versus mammals and so on. And I thought there was good evidence that random changes plus selection could explain species, maybe genus, but in between that, in between class, there's order and family and genus and so on. Science simply hadn't progressed far enough for a strong conclusion to be made. But that was 10 years ago, and science has made a lot of progress, and it's accelerating. And it turns out that I was right, that somewhere in that is the edge of evolution, but I think it's much deeper than the level of class. I think it actually goes down to the level of family, which is dogs versus cats and so on. So if that's correct, then the information needed to specify a dog, a generic dog versus a generic cat, had to have been intelligently arranged. And perhaps dog breeds or different kinds of cats could arise from from the ancestor cats, probably by devolution, by breaking genes, and as we've seen in many cases, breaking genes could help. But I think that information is at least needed down to the level of family. And I think the more and more science knows and finds out, the deeper and deeper into life design is seen to extend. My first book, Darwin's Black Box, I pointed out a problem that most everybody senses but really didn't have a term to it yet. It was actually suggested by a man named St. George Mivart, who was a biologist writing 10 years after Darwin. And he says, well, yeah, Darwin's idea of variation and selection, it'll work, but with things like the eye can't see until it's got a number of parts with it. So he called that the problem of incipient structures. And I kind of extended the concept to a molecular level, because molecular machinery needs a number of different parts to work too. And I coined a term, irreducible complexity, to kind of focus light on that particular problem. And the term means that you've got a machine or a system or something that has a number of parts, and it needs all those parts to work. And if you take one away, the system can't work anymore. It can't be reduced. And an example I used was a mousetrap, a mechanical mousetrap. And in most mechanical mousetraps, they've got a handful of different parts, and if you take away one or more, then it simply can't work. You take out the spring, it's broken. You remove the little hammer that hits the mouse, and it's broken too. Well, Darwinists have, for the past 20 years or so, been trying to counter that argument, and they've offered a number of arguments, but in my completely unbiased opinion, they all fail. And one argument is that, well, the pieces of the mousetrap could be used for something else. So you don't have to have something that's working as a mousetrap right away. You could use things for other purposes, and then maybe they could come together. For example, one scientist in a debate, he said, well, we can use a mousetrap without what's called a holding bar to keep the the metal piece open, he said, I could use that as a tie clip. And as a matter of fact, he had it on his shirt as a tie clip just to emphasize his point. And he says, why, we could take the wooden base and we can use it as a paperweight. And he said that this Behe fellow said that without all the parts, the mousetrap can't function. But look, these parts are doing different jobs. And that just really kind of distorts the argument. It's not that you can't use a piece of some complex machine as a paperweight. Anything can be a paperweight. The irreducible complexity concept says that if you take one away, you can't have a mousetrap anymore. You can't use that as a mousetrap. And in fact, that still holds. And even with that argument, it doesn't hold up because in order to have parts that will later be put together into a mousetrap, you've got to have that future goal in mind. If you look at paperweights, none of them look like they're going to be used for a mousetrap base. If you look at tie clips on the internet, say, none of them are in the shape of a mousetrap, save for pictures of that guy who was given a talk with the mousetrap on his tie. So that's a big problem, is people, when they're imagining the evolution of things, they kind of use their intelligence to guide things along the way. But Darwin's theory is a radical theory. He says that no guidance, nothing like that is needed.